everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not outside riding or running or spectating riding or running, I'm probably writing about it.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and you are here on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk about all different types of movement and to the people that do those different types of movement.
All right, that was like a 8 out of 10.
We're learning.
Yeah,
keeping it shorter.
All right, so what have we been up to this week?
Well, as you alluded to, we were spectating the World Championships for cross-country Olympic mountain biking, a little bit for downhill mountain biking, but mostly just for the cross-country Olympic discipline.
Yeah, they were at Mont Saint Anne, which is just near Quebec City, and yeah, it was a fantastic weekend. You know, Saint Anne's a really iconic venue, super technical stuff, super terrifying stuff on the course. So it was really fun just kind of climbing around the mountain. I admit I was supposed to be on a rest day on Saturday, and according to my phone, I still managed to log, I think it was like 15,000 steps and 6 miles and like 1,000 meters climbed, just scrambling up and down the mountain, just trying to watch and cheer on some of the best in the world.
It seems like a very statistical day of leisure, but
well, we were all comparing notes at the end to see who walked the most. I feel like your phone was a little generous with some of your stats, but
all of my devices are generous. Mm-hmm. They're very keyed for success.
But yeah, super fun weekend, and yeah, great kind of catching up with a ton of our friends. I mean, honestly, it's quite a few people who listen to this show I ran into on the mountain, which was pretty sweet. So,
well, and we had Jen Jackson, who's been on the podcast, I think, twice now, raced the mountain bikes, but she was the one she was on talking about cross-country skiing a bit and sort of just transitioning into between sports. Mm-hmm. And she did great. That was, I think, maybe not her first World Championships, but that was maybe the first time she sort of on Team Canada and moving up, and yeah.
Yeah, really great to see her.
Actually, I think that's her first World Championships. I'm going to take that back. That's the second or third time she's raced at or at the World Cup. But yeah, that's the difference. But yeah, clean race, and so congratulations to her, and yeah, lots of friends racing. Who else?
I don't think anyone else that we've had on the podcast was there. I feel like that was really throwing me to the wolves to be like, and name someone else who's been there. We can name plenty.
Oh, Kate Courtney raced, obviously.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, we've had Kate Courtney on the podcast, so you can go back and get your mountain bike fix. Was there a favorite moment that you had over the weekend?
Right now, it was realizing that my camera was, in fact, found by someone, and I'm getting it back. So, yeah. Actually, so I guess that leads to one of my favorite moments. I got to interview Beck McConnell, who got third in the women's race, and that was super fun. And then I got to interview Nino Schurter, who won the men's race. It was his 8th World Championship title. And I admit I was kind of in like a kerfuffled mode after I'd spoken to Nino and just kind of exited the press center thinking my camera was in my backpack. It was not. And luckily the amazing people in the media center found it and sent it back with one of the awesome Red Bull people. So shout out to both the race organizers and Red Bull for rescuing my camera.
And just the general human populace for not stealing it.
Definitely, yeah.
Right.
Props to all the reporters that were there that didn't steal my camera.
It's a very happy moment here at the Herford Glassford home. So,
yeah.
I'm trying to think if I had a top moment. You know, it's cool to see that like peak of the sport, right? Like that course especially is very technical, but then also just the hills are very, very steep. You're basically climbing up the steepest slope you've ever seen and like having to think the whole time because traction's hard and you're going around switchbacks, and then you go right into like something that most people would not be able to ride down. So it's a true test, I think, of the athlete. So just cool to see the caliber and just the different strategies and the technology and yeah.
Yeah,
really,
to
really
me,
good.
The mental game for that course is just so intensive because, yeah, there's just no break whatsoever. You're either redlined climbing or you have to be so on the descents that, yeah, mentally and emotionally, there's really no spot where you're like, phew, calmed down here. So the mental toughness it takes.
And I pointed it out to you. It was you posted a couple of Instagrams of people in there, like falling over and so forth. I always blank on his name. What is his name?
Chris Blevins.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Blevins. I feel like I've forgot his name before.
I think so.
So anyhow, very talented racer. If you look up his Instagram, Christopher Blevins, I think it's like Chris Blevs or something like this.
You're really bad for his name.
He rides for Specialized, I think, right? Yes. So anyhow, very talented in all different types of bikes. Like he has like BMX stuff he's doing, and he's always jumping and manualing stuff and whatever. But like, you know, even this course, because again, you're just so drilled and cross-eyed, like he was climbing and like screwed up going around switchbacks and then had to run a big chunk. And I think it was just like, it's that stuff that like I think a lot of people don't ever get to see, where like they assume that the people at the front are they don't have to go that hard because they're so fit, and then, you know, they never screw up and they're never scared and they're never, you know, crashing, you know. So I think it's just like I thought it was worth mentioning that this person who like even I am like, whoa, like he is next level talented, right. You know, just even for me to see like, yeah, he fell over going uphill and then he got back up and carried on, right? Yeah, and he had a great race, right?
And you know what? On the topic of running versus riding on those things, you know, we always come back to this, and I always say it at mountain bike clinics and stuff. Sometimes you're just going to be faster to get off and run with your bike. And we saw in the women's race, one woman passed 3 women on that same set of switchbacks because she dismounted while she still had some speed and just started running immediately and passed 3 women, one of whom was still actually rolling along. But you still got around it.
Yeah, it's the sort of frustrating thing, right? Like sometimes there's different strategies. And I think especially when you have your cyclocross mounts, dismounts really down, right?
Just sort of taking away that stress of like, hey, you know, it's not a bad thing necessarily that you're off your bike.
Well, and I actually had a similar, so Ryan Leach is a membership site that sort of has different videos, so you can learn how to wheelie, you can learn, so last year I did cyclocross mounts, dismounts. I'd love for you to check it out. It's like $10, I think you can buy the course, or $10 for the membership, and it takes you through stepwise for whatever skill you want to learn. And so someone had posted cyclocross is starting to up, and it was this really steep grassy hill with like 2, not even logs, but like 2 humps that sort of you had to roll over, and he was sort of asking about how you would maybe ride that. And so I was like, well, I mean, you might actually want to, there's some good like wheelie, like sort of uphill mountain bike type stuff that might be good. But I was like, at some point, like I'd probably just run up the steep hill, right? And I don't know, there's both sides of it, right? There's the riding skill, but then there's also just another tool in your toolbox, right?
So on the topic of skills, let's talk about today's guest. He's all about hydration, which I'm gonna say is the biggest skill that I have learned in the last year.
Yeah, and we have it's an interesting concept because like hydration is a lot like nutrition, right? Like, there's a lot of different beliefs, a lot of different camps, a lot of different, like, it's pretty personalized.
I was gonna say, and it all comes back to it depends
who you are, and then what you're doing, and then what you're doing on that day, right? So yeah, so really interesting. But this came across our sort of desk, and they reached out to us, actually, the folks over at Precision Hydration, so precisionhydration.com. Andy Blow is the founder, and he actually is an amazing, like, really interesting guy and has a tremendous sort of consummate athlete background. So this episode is largely about his background and some really good sort of takeaways, I thought. But we do get into a bit about cramping and just some hydration and electrolyte type concepts, but what I would love is if there's something that like we start talking about as far as hydration, cramping, electrolytes that like piques your interest, please reach out in our contact form or at Molly or I on Twitter or whatever you hopefully follow us on, and thank you for that. Just because we'd love to have him back on and do a very specific sort of hydration electrolyte, but there was just so much to talk to him about. So we had a great conversation.
I will also add, this is, hashtag not sponsored, hashtag not an ad. And I think when we went into talking to Andy, we were both a little bit like, okay, if this turns out he's just gonna, hit us with a ton of ad stuff the whole time and just be, constantly promoting this thing, we're just not gonna run with it. But like Peter ended up glowing after this interview. He really loved talking to him. So yeah, just wanted to put it out there that this is not a sponsored thing. Although we will say they have given us a great discount code. So if you do listen and you are interested, you can go to precisionhydration.com, enter the code consummate athlete, just all caps, no spaces, and you get 15% off your entire order, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I think we alluded to this episode in our Q&A last week.
Yep.
Sort of that balance of hydration, like how much water you're drinking, and then balancing that with the salts that you have in you, right? So we do talk a bit more about that, and that is what their products are, sort of electrolyte supplements to help with that. So I thought it was really interesting. I've been sort of curious about that, sort of preloading with salt and sort of putting a bit more salt, especially for people that do have cramps or people that are like really salty sweaters. We sort of talk about how it's, a fairly low risk thing to try, right? Like we're just talking about potentially just a shake of salt in your bottle, right? Or a product like this.
So what you're saying is I can add more salt to my food.
Well, what we don't talk about too as much in this one, which is maybe for the future episode, is also just that how that's different, like the preloading and in workout versus like the rest of your day, right? So that could be a potential thing for you, is if there's a lot of salt out of the workout, how that changes hydration status going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, again, lots of takeaways, whether you're into hydration or not. I think there are going to be lots of good stuff here. There's a bunch of multi-sport, transitioning between sports. When you're injured, I thought one of the best things, my favorite moment in this was just talking about he got injured and couldn't run and do triathlon. So then he actually learned how to kayak and just went full gas on kayaking for a couple months while that recovered. So I thought maybe if you're injured here towards the end of the season, that might be motivation to work on pull-ups or go kayaking or something like this.
There are, a lot of water sports are kind of no legs required. I mean, even swimming, for the most part, you can use a, buoy and,
sure,
not really have to use your legs. Sup, as long as you can stand up.
Well, you could kneel on a sup.
Oh, true, yeah. So I hadn't really thought of water sports as like a solid injured person's game, but I kind of love that.
Yeah, so hopefully you enjoy this. Again, reach out if there's something on either sides of this conversation that you wanted us to cover a bit more. And yeah, hope you enjoy Andy Blow. All right, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. We're here today with Andy Blow, and Andy's with Precision Hydration, but also just a consummate athlete. He is a specimen of an athlete. He's done tons of things ranging from, full-out Ironman at Kona, and also some swim run stuff, which I'm really excited to talk about because I know both Molly and myself are sort of interested in that and also terrified of it. So I'm excited to talk about that. Andy, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, Peter.
We'd like to always start just sort of, again, a consummate athlete. We like to hear what people are up to, where they've come from. So do you want to give us sort of just a rundown of your very extensive athletic bio and sort of where you've come from and where you're at right now?
Yeah, I have played and participated in a lot of different sports. I'm one of those people that has probably not been really all that great at any sport, but I've done a fair few over the years. And I think, like most kids in the UK where I'm from, I started off playing soccer, football as we call it, and that was my first my first competitive sport. And I think when I was younger, my dad tells me that I did say I wanted to be a professional soccer player, but was clearly not destined for that, and found out through doing cross-country running and other things that we did alongside it that I was probably better at running without a ball at my feet than I was with a ball at my feet. And so that started me off getting interested in endurance sports, and I did cross-country running at school level. I did a little bit of swimming at a sort of low club level, but then I got into I did a biathlon, a swim run, when I was in my early teens, and it was on the same day as a triathlon, and I got really interested in the bikes, and my dad was good enough to then kind of see that and got me a road bike, and that's when I started to get really into triathlon, which was the sport I pursued hardest for the most amount of years. I ended up studying sports science at the University of Bath in the UK, which was a triathlon centre of excellence as well. So I got some great coaching there and got to a level where I was kind of competing at the lower end of the international spectrum for triathlon. And then that led into Xterra, and it led into Ironman racing. And then that subsequently, as I kind of fizzled out and got bored with that led into other more adventurous type stuff. I did the race across New Zealand, the coast to coast race, which is kind of cycling, kayaking and running. I've done some surf ski racing and some downriver kayak paddling, and more recently I've got into swim run racing, which is the kind of started in Sweden, the Otalo island to island long duration swimming and running, which is probably the thing I'm doing most of these days.
Wow, that's super impressive. There's two ways I want to go. I think I'll first go with your professional stuff. Did you choose that university based on its triathlon focus?
Yeah, a lot of it was that. It was when I went to look at the university, they were just building a 50-meter swimming pool there, which there's not a lot of those in the UK, and there certainly wasn't many of those at the time, and that was a huge draw for me because I sort of really wanted to get into that. And yeah, I kind of also just liked the vibe of the place, and I actually ended up not applying for any other colleges at all. I just wanted to go there, and that was that. And that was my mind made up.
Yeah, it's funny. I chose my school similar. It was close to home, close to the races for mountain biking, and the riding was pretty good, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't regret it. Do you regret your choice based on that criteria?
No, definitely not. Although when I look back, it sort of does fill me with horror that that's what I chose it based on. How I was going to spend a lot of my money and my parents' money and the grant money that we used to get was all really based on the fact that there was a decent swimming pool there.
Right.
Didn't seem like the most rational way to decide, but at the time that I was focused on, I guess really I was kind of one of those people. I was interested in the academics, but really I wanted to be an athlete, and I saw it as a kind of way of pursuing that as much as I did pursuing my studies.
And maybe it fits better, like your major, I guess it makes it so it's probably permissible that you chose it that way, with the physiology. If you were going to go into something like economics or something and you chose it strictly on its triathlon leanings, then that's maybe a little more questionable.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and then the other way I want to go is, there's a lot of different movements, a lot of different sports here. Like, how do you pick, like, how do you go from swimming, running, and then suddenly you're skiing all of a sudden? Like, there has to be some middle ground here where you're a beginner in these sports. Like, how do you pick those up so quickly?
Well, the thing was, I was lucky in that although I didn't swim at a super competitive level when I was a kid, I did swim at a club level. So I was swimming 3-4 times a week. I could swim all the strokes and that kind of thing. So when I wanted to get into triathlon as a teenager, I had that basic grounding already, and I had to work a lot on my swimming to get it up to a reasonable standard. But I already had the basic skill set there, and the running obviously transferred to cycling. I had to pick up, and then from there, really, it was, I guess, other things. Well, a major driving factor for me, I got into the kayaking because I wanted to do the coast to coast race across New Zealand, which has a substantial 70-kilometre sort of downriver whitewater kayaking element to it, which you have to be pretty reasonable in a boat to undertake. But I also got a nasty knee injury from doing too much hard running as a triathlete, for which I had to have surgery, and that put me on my backside for a good 2 or 3 years. And one of the only things I could really do was something like kayaking. So that provided the impetus to get into that. So some of it transferred across because it was stuff that I wanted to do. Others, like the kayaking, were more of a something that just was almost forced upon me. But looking back, that was probably quite a good thing because I'd have just carried on the one track otherwise. And then the swim run stuff was more of an extension when I got back into running post knee surgery, but didn't want to keep running Ironmans and marathons and stuff. That just seemed like another interesting avenue because I'd upped my swimming again, and then all of a sudden this race appears where you've got to swim like 10 kilometers alongside a load of running, and I thought, well, that's perfect for me. I'll give that a crack, and went and did it. So a lot of it's just been following my nose, really, and serendipity.
Right. And there must be those still, like, you grew up swimming, so I guess you're comfortable in the water. But to me, the swim run stuff, just some of that open water stuff and super cold water, just seems terrifying in some ways. Yeah,
there's that bit of it is probably, or can be, the most unpleasant part of it if you're not used to it. I remember definitely when I first started open water swimming, coming from the pool swimming background, that swimming too far offshore was quite intimidating, and definitely when I started kayaking and surf ski racing and ocean sea kayaking, I found it really, really unnerving to be a long way offshore. But actually, I think partly it was the kayaking that helped me overcome that, because as you get better at that, you want to go further, and you start to get used to being in that open water environment. You start to kind of love the ocean more than you're scared of it. You've always got to be respectful of it because it can be a dangerous place. But I've since I guess I gradually overcame that out of wanting to do more and more, and then that's fed back into the open water swimming. The one thing I do, even though in the UK we often end up swimming in fairly cold water, I always struggle with that, and that's one thing that really tests me in these swim run races. Actually, is the longer swimming sections, especially in the real cold water. That's probably my least favourite part of all of it, but I guess if you want to race in it, the adrenaline helps, and you just grit your teeth and put your head down and get on with it.
Right. Do you wear like a thicker wetsuit, or is there have you come up with anything for coping in that, or like even mental strategies? Like I am similar in that we did Ironman. Mountain biking's been my main thing, but we did Ironman there 2 years ago, and definitely it was just the cold. It wasn't. I actually really liked open water, but the cold I just can't handle. So is there a strategy?
There's a few things. The kit is one thing, and ironically, so when I started doing swim run racing, the technology was not there. You basically pretty much got an old triathlon swimming wetsuit and cut the arms and legs off it and got going. And that was actually okay in the water because they're quite thick and buoyant, but rubbish for the running. And you got too hot and it strained your hamstrings and hips because of how tight it was around your legs. So then these companies started making specific swim run wetsuits, and obviously that's a compromise item because you want it thinner and lighter for the running, but then it's less buoyant and warm in the water. So ironically, the swim run wetsuits we use now are significantly thinner and lighter. Basically, if the air temperature is hot, then the strategy largely is you will get warm with the running, and you accept that when you hit the water, if you're doing a longer swim, your temperature is going to deteriorate a little bit, and it's just trying to make sure that it doesn't fall too far off. If the air temperature is also cold, I quite often wear a 1 or 2 millimeter neoprene vest like a surfer would wear underneath the swim run suit to add that extra little bit of insulation on your core, and maybe things like a neoprene headband over your ears that goes under your swim hat to take the chill off your forehead if the water's really cold. The interesting thing about swim run as well, though, is that it's a pairs race generally. There are solo events, but the ones I've done have been predominantly pairs races. So to an extent, the speed that you can swim at is dictated by your partner. And what I've found is that if you're the stronger partner, it helps to be tethered to your slightly weaker partner on the longer swims, because then you can sit on the front and actually work pretty hard still without dropping them because you're tethered together, and that helps you keep your temperature up. One mistake I made in a couple of early races was we didn't tether, and if my partner was not quite as strong a swimmer, I would end up swimming quite slowly to try and allow them to stay with me, or swimming on their feet, and so you can see them, but either way you're not expending a lot of energy, and that's when you get really, really cold. And so that's a big mistake to avoid, I think.
That's a great tip. Yeah, and I think even transfers over to other sports. I can see, just got back from a mountain bike stage race where people similarly are racing together, right? And even just with drafting, if not tethering, you could. Yeah,
you definitely got it. Yeah, like with that, you've got to wear more kit, more clothing, more windproof layers or whatever. If you're the rider that's working a little bit less hard, you could definitely obviously chill off pretty quickly. So yeah, it's something to think about in those pairs races, which seem to be becoming more popular.
Yeah, they're fun, right? Like they do add another sort of dimension to it. It's frustrating, and you get into like little fights, and people get grumpy, but it adds a nice element, and it's sort of. I've always had really good bonds. They've been good friends going in, but it's a crazy thing you've done with someone, right? Like it's a really unique experience.
Oh, 100%. They're one of the things that's really kept me going with sport after sort of, I guess, hanging up my boots on the really individual competitive stuff. That one of the first races I did, as well as the Otelo swim run, was I did the Trans Alps running race, which is a pairs race, sort of a stage race for running through the Alps in Europe. And I did that with a good friend of mine, Elliot, and it was just so good to be able to share it with someone else, and in some ways it adds a different pressure, but largely it takes the pressure off because you're working with someone, you're sharing the stories, and we still talk about it now. This is like 6-7 years later. It's one of the best things we've ever done. And then I've done kayak races in a K2, which is a double kayak, where I've done them with my brother, I've done them with Johnny, my business partner, and other people. And yeah, it's just fantastic to share these experiences. and makes them a bit more meaningful, and there's all that great build up of training together and then talking about it afterwards, and it's really changed it for me, and I think it's a healthy thing.
Yeah, really good, right? I think in I'll say this day and age, I don't want to feel like that gets overused these days, but it's a unique bond with like another human, and I feel like it's just a very good, like, I know going in, like, I've done one with basically my best friend, but it's something, 2005 I think we did that, and still we talk about it, right? And I just was looking at photos just randomly last night actually from it, and that's like well over a decade now, right? We're going to 15 years.
It's very cool.
Yeah, so I think that's great. Like, our listeners, a lot of us are people who, maybe we're racing elite or competitively, whatever that meant for us at the level we are, and sort of exactly what you're describing. I think that's an amazing little sort of just even, we'll call it a tidbit, for people, just to consider, whether it's whatever, there's all sorts of different, the running, I know a lot of those Trans Rockies run just happened, and I believe you can do that as a pair. So there's lots of different ways to do these sort of like group, adventure racing would be another one, which it sounds like you've done a bit of quote unquote adventure racing, right?
Yeah, I've done a bit of that in teams of 3 and 4. Incorporating sort of mountain biking and navigation and obstacles and all that kind of stuff. And again, that's another sort of bit of fun and diversion, and takes a bit of recalibration when you first get into that stuff and you're used to just racing very set courses under your own steam at the best pace you can go and everything. It does take a mindset change to actually race sympathetically with your teammates and work together and accept strengths and weaknesses and spend some of the time being one of the stronger ones and leading and assisting and waiting for people, and on the flip side sometimes maybe being one of the weaker ones and being dragged along or encouraged along. And I think for me, without being too grandiose about it, it's good personal development, because in one thing endurance athletes often can become is relatively selfish. You have to be pretty selfish to put the hours into training. It's quite a selfish pursuit in general, and actually, maybe doing it with other people is a good antidote to some of that, especially as you get a bit older.
Yeah, and unique, I think, in the adventure racing especially, but really just over the course of many days, you're going to have, someone feeling better at a certain point, or certainly in adventure racing, someone who's very good at navigating, or kayaking isn't as good at running, or whatever, right?
It teaches you a lot about communication and that sort of thing, because you have to communicate and work together and have a plan, but adjust that plan as you're going. I've been racing. The last swim run race that I did this year was in the Isles of Scilly off the UK, and I raced with one of my colleagues from Precision Hydration, James, who's much younger than me, frankly quite a bit fitter and in a straight line and everything quite a bit faster. But we found it that actually, because I'd got a lot of experience with the racing and he basically brought a lot of raw performance and fitness to it, we were able to play off each other quite nicely, and both of us kind of we outperformed what we expected, I think, because we were able to maximize each other's strengths and weaknesses. And whereas we definitely saw other teams around us implode and not do so well because there was a bit of infighting or a bit of ego and a bit of pushing each other at the wrong times and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just it's added a new dimension to it all for me, which has been great.
And I just want to circle back a little bit. When you're talking about kayaking and some of these boat sports, where did you find the time and energy to go back and sort of, you must have had to learn some of the basics and at least sort of what you need to do this stuff. Like, is that through adventure racing and some of these partners and stuff, you just sort of got dragged through it, or how did you go about acquiring that? I don't see kayaking fitting into your swimming and triathlon sort of background.
No, it didn't, and I had to start from ground zero, scratch with that. And anyone who has seen me trying to pick up new physical skills like that will probably attest to the fact that I am a below average learner when it comes to like new skill sports. It takes me forever to accomplish things, but I was lucky in the respect that my uncle was a very, very good kayaker and a kayak instructor, and my cousin, his son, Ben Brown, is a kayaking world champion for marathon paddling a few years ago. So I kind of had the links, and they were really helpful in helping to identify, a few basics for me. Although I didn't live particularly close to them, I was able to go paddling with them a few times and start to learn. But then I think what made all the difference to me really then was this the knee injury that I mentioned. I had a year of like frustrating diagnosis where I couldn't really run or cycle at all. I had another year of then finding a surgeon who could tackle the job that needed doing, then getting it done and rehabbing. And by the time I came out of that process, I was so frustrated with not being able to do anything. I was still months and years away from being able to run and cycle again properly, that I basically decided that the kayaking was going to be the thing, and just threw myself at it. And just that became my hobby at that time. And that was a little bit before. I've got children now, and that was all a little bit pre-children, so I did have the luxury of a little bit more time. And I did what I normally do with these things, which is for a short time I became basically mildly obsessed with it, and that is what I did. And I think that now, even looking back at that, and it's what I did with my swimming when I went to university. I think that a really good way, if you want to learn a new skill or something, is rather than dabble at it, is I'm a big believer in kind of going all in, but for a constrained amount of time. It might be 6 months or 12 months or whatever, to really get the basics of that new skill embedded, and then you can back off and incorporate it in amongst now. So now I'll occasionally go paddling, and my paddling is not at the level that it was, but it's not bad because I had that initial like obsessive intense grounding and getting the basic skills sorted out.
Sure. I love that. I love the using injury to do something else. And I love the sort of block based, just getting obsessed, right? That could be weather, it could be injury, it could be where you are, you have to stay with family. So maybe there's a local pool, versus going out on like 6-hour bike rides, right? And maybe you just become a swimmer for, a few months and just sort of learn that. I think that fits amazing.
Yeah. I also did, although I went down the route of, taking some instruction, but largely a lot of, I wouldn't say I was self-taught, but I sort of practiced on my own a lot, basically. Right. But I also did go on a couple of really decent courses for some specifics. So where I live, I'm lucky. I live near the sea, and there's a river there. Well, there's 2 rivers actually that I can paddle on. So I can paddle on flat water, or I can go and paddle in the sea with some waves and with some chop and wind and stuff. So I've got lots of options. But one thing I don't have is fast flowing river water. So like the kind of whitewater stuff that is necessary in some of the races. So I actually went on a course in Sweden for a week and did a specific downriver paddling course that I'd found, which was for kind of competent multi-sport athletes to do, but to really upskill their your development in whitewater. And I found doing little things like that really useful as well, because I still draw on some of the experiences I learned on that course now, because that's one of my most intense periods of paddling whitewater that I've had. Right. So picking out times and places where you can go and get the best expertise, but then being prepared to go away and work on those skills on your own is a good idea as well.
Yeah, I think you need both for sure. Just that like consistent, like putting in the reps, right? But then also, I like that you sort of went away for even like an extra focused block with instruction with like specific terrain, right? Like it's almost the terrain. Sometimes I coach mountain biking skills, and sometimes it's actually just finding the right situation, context, environment, right? Is almost what you need to get people to. And sometimes it's in the kayaking example, right? Like you need to find that fast flowing water. Right, it's the instruction will help, but you also just need to put the boat in the water and see what happens, right? Yeah,
go and do it, basically. Yeah, I do look back at some of the things that I did now and wince a little bit. Like when I first got a sea kayak, I live on the south coast in the UK, and we can see from the beach, we can see an island called the Isle of Wight, which is about 7 miles away towards the horizon. And I thought to myself, I'm going to paddle across to there, as you do, because if you're an athlete, you see these goals, you're like, I could paddle there and back. It's only 7 miles, having no idea about currents and wind and waves and all that kind of stuff, and I ended up like capsizing, falling out, getting washed up onto the shore 5 miles away, having to ditch my boat and run all the way back in bare feet to get my car to go and pick the boat up. And looking back at it now, and I had none of the right equipment, none of the right clothing, and there were definitely some things which I did which I look at and go, probably not the wisest. I got away with that, you know. And I think that's where sometimes you have to be careful in just throwing yourself at new things. Right. But at the same time, you know, part of me also thinks, well, you know, it's also how you learn. So sometimes you got to risk assess as you go, and hopefully, I think as I got older, my risk assessment might have got a bit better. That's probably one of the outcomes.
A little bit of instruction early, right? Because I think that's where even you say now you don't paddle as much, but you can still go back and, you know, you sort of understand the equipment, you understand like the things that don't make sense, you understand, you know, just the basic mechanics and technique.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's where like that early instruction can sort of be like, hey, you just don't go into open water alone. That's not a thing you do. And this is the gear you need for safety. You know, if you have this, you know, life jacket and so on, you know, then you're going to be just in a better shape. And then you can just go and sort of just like experiment, but at least you're, you know, in the right area, at least.
Yeah.
Direction.
Yeah. No, I realize now looking back at that, my ignorance was like pretty complete, and I would not have attempted that knowing what I know now. But
well, I guess ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah, exactly.
With it. You mentioned family, so we may as well go there, and then we'll get into a bit of hydration stuff, because I know everyone's always interested in cramping and hydration, so we'll tease that. But you mentioned now you're a family man, you got that, and you're still, you know, going after this swim run and stuff like that. So, you know, where do you fit that in? You know, you're also you have this business, you're running as well. It sounds busy.
It is pretty busy. I've basically found a level for me that I think works with the sport and training at the moment. Anyway, so my kids are 2.5 and 5.5, so they're at a really active and interesting age, and keep me and my wife really busy. So basically for me, training time is, and with running the business as well, training time is relatively low on the hierarchy of stuff that needs to get done. So I log all of my training now, because mainly out of interest to see how much I'm doing, and it seems to average on about 4 to 5 hours a week in general. So I have to make it count, and I basically will swim 2 or 3 times a week on average, and I'll run 3 or 4 times a week usually, and if I can get that in, that keeps me ticking over. And I try to do a fair amount of quality over quantity training, not because I'm not a believer in doing bigger mileages, but because I simply don't have the capacity to. And very occasionally I'll get out and do long sessions, you know, sort of. But even these days, a long session for me would be a 2-hour run. Not like it used to be when I used to go out and do 6 or 7 hours on the bike, followed by a 2-hour run. You know, it would be just doing a 30k or 18-mile run is a really long day for me at the moment. And what I've found is that although that's definitely not perfect, these swim run races last anywhere between about 4 and 8 hours, or 9 hours if it's the big one, the World Championships. And it's not optimal to train like I do, but it's good enough to get me round and make me feel like I can be competitive to a level that I'm happy with. So that's typically what a training week, you know, revolves around for me at the moment. And I tend to get out early in the morning. If my training isn't done before about 7:30 a.m., then it probably isn't going to happen. So it has to happen before then.
Yeah, there's a lot of mental fatigue and things that sort of pop up that weren't supposed to pop up, right? It's
100%, yeah. Because I get sometimes my kids go to bed at around 7:30. They can be asleep before 8 p.m. So theoretically, if I had the energy and time, I could get out and maybe sneak another run in or something. But I could count the number of times on one hand that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, because I just need to recover. And actually, I've really, the sleep deprivation that comes with having kids has been a big part of what's made me prioritize getting even more sleep than I used to, because I realize just how much of a killer that is. And I see that with a lot of athletes, you know, that we come across, that sleep definitely gets eroded as your life gets busier. And if you're trying to perform and train and stuff, I think it's a real false economy, actually. And it's something I've become I've become really quite, you know, structured about with my own life now, is getting to bed early and getting plenty of sleep. Yeah,
it's so linked to just how you feel, well control or willpower, that sort of stuff, right? And it sort of snowballs into everything, you know, even glucose control. I would imagine you can even talk probably it links into this hydration and electrolyte balance in some ways as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, on the nutrition side, you know, I know from personal experience, but also from all the science or the reading, that you basically just make horrendous nutritional decisions when you're sleep deprived. You know, when I'm traveling, because I go to the US fairly frequently from the UK and suffer pretty badly with jet lag sometimes when I'm over there, and the draw of like eating basically junk food is almost unstoppable when you're just in that sleep deprived state. Your body just craves all this crazy junk, and it's not good in the long run. You know, you have to try and, you know, recognize it and deal with it, and yeah, that's been a real challenge.
Yeah, and changing that mindset of, 4 to 5 hours of training is amazing and great, especially when it's in the background of, you know, you're controlling stress, you're getting in that valuable time with the family, and then prioritizing sleep. Like, is that better than eking out those 8 to 10 hours, right? Are you, a happier, healthier, leaner, all these things, well-rested, motivated on the start line when you come to these races, right? And now, are you in much better shape versus the person who's like really squeezed out 8 hours, but is again sleep deprived, maybe, body composition, not happy, family's mad at them, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's all part of the bigger picture, isn't it? And you have to decide. There are times when you need to push on a bit and maybe squeeze that extra session in or whatever, but I would say that they're less frequent than most people reckon. I had a really interesting experience earlier this year with the race I mentioned before. When I raced with James at the Scilly Isles, I was travelling in the US about 3 or 4 weeks before the race. So I was trying, and often what I'll try and do when I'm traveling in the US is actually, that's when I can squeeze a little bit more training in, ironically, because I've not got the family around if I'm traveling on business, and I can do a few extra sessions or a bit of a longer run here and there. And looking back, I did something kind of stupid, because I flew into New York and I went for a really good run, and I ran about 15 miles on the morning after I'd got in and got to my hotel. And then that day I had my meetings, and then that day I flew across the US to Portland, Oregon, and I had some meetings there, and I went for a really good long, like 20-mile trail run in the forest around Portland. And then the next morning I got up and did a hard swimming set with the local swimming group there, and I thought, this is going great, I'm smashing all this training in, I'm getting everything done. Then I flew down to LA for some more meetings, and then I woke up that night with like sweats and shivers and cold and bang, and I'd gone down hard with the flu, and I was really ill. And when people say, some people say, I got the flu, I hadn't had a flu like this for 10 or 15 years. It was so bad that I basically I went to a clinic, got a swab test to make sure it was the flu and not something else like Lyme's disease or whatever from being bitten in the woods. And then I just locked myself in a hotel room for like 4 days, and I was totally, and ended up cancelling a load of stuff, flying home, being ill, being laid up for another 8 or 10 days. I was really, really out of sorts. And I think it was a combination of, obviously I'd picked up the virus, but I'd pushed my body pretty hard on jet lag, not a lot of sleep, seeing this like opportunity to get some more extra training in and going for it. And I just went for it too hard and just ran myself into the ground.
Right.
But then
maybe observing like an easy day,
exactly
when you first got in, and making sure you got that first day of sleep and stuff, maybe.
Yeah, just being sensible. But then what was really, really interesting was I was so badly ill when I got home. There was no talk of training, and I said to James when I got back, I'm really sorry, but I think this race is only 2 weeks or 10 days out or whatever it is now. I think you're gonna have to find another partner. But and so he started asking around, and then I started feeling my way back in, and it was only about 5 or 6 days out from the race that I actually started doing a little bit of light exercise again, and thought, I feel pretty good. And I'd been sleeping like 16 hours a day to try and recover from this bug. And then I started to come good, and then on the Wednesday before, I said, you know what, I think I'm in for this. And he hadn't got someone else to race, so we went and did it. And I felt it's some of the strongest I've felt. We raced for 5 hours, and I felt strongest I've felt for years in that particular race. And I'm sort of convinced that part of it was because I just had such a long taper and big rest into it, which I never would normally have done. I would never have tapered that aggressively.
Yeah.
And it's talking to other athletes, I don't know if you've had any experiences like that, but I would never have, that was an enforced rest. I wouldn't have chosen to take that time off, But having done so, it certainly didn't do anything to diminish my performance in that race. It seemed actually to give me more energy, which was a big learning lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear that often, right? Like, it's especially for the endurance athletes, right? We just like that feeling of being, tired, that low-grade fatigue. And runners especially, right? Like, there's always just this pounding, and then it's amazing what, you get recovered and your body gets on top of things. And, again, you're just so amped to be out, right? You don't have that mental fatigue, I think we often overlook as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to lead us down? I want to make sure we get onto hydration and cramping. Like, how did you have problems here? It sounds like you've had all these amazing events and stuff over your career, but you've had some adversity as far as cramping goes.
Definitely. I really, really suffered badly with cramping most of my younger athletic life. I would often cramp, especially when it was hot. And where it really was hammered home to me was when I spent a lot of time trying to qualify for Kona for the Ironman in the early 2000s. And when I did, I went there and basically fell apart with cramps and issues on the course. And it was horrible, and it was really soul destroying at the time. And the shorter version of that longer story is that a doctor friend of mine had already observed that I have a high sweat rate. This is pretty obvious to anyone who knows me. When I go training, my clothes are basically drenched with sweat in a short amount of time. And he also noticed that he could see a lot of salt on my skin and clothing when I raced. And he said we should get a sweat test done. And even as a physiologist, I didn't really know what that entailed, but I had a sweat test done which told me that the salt composition of my sweat was unusually high. I was in the top few percent of what a normal person would lose, and this was interesting. And then the friend of mine who's a doctor said, basically we tried taking more salt in races, and it was like night and day. The difference it made to me was unbelievable. Before, I'd maybe supplemented small amounts of electrolytes but drunk a lot of fluid because I was aware of my high sweat rate. And what we figured out was I'd basically been causing myself to become hypernatremic, which is where you dilute the salt levels in your blood and in your body to such an extent that you start to get all sorts of dysfunction. And it can actually be quite dangerous. People can die from hypernatremia, and people do die every year, unfortunately, in marathons and Ironmans and stuff through essentially over drinking plain water or low sodium fluids and not replacing enough of the salt that they're losing in their sweat. And that led me down this track of then becoming quite interested in this as I transitioned out of, full-time sport being my main thing into working with athletes, coaching athletes, working as a sports scientist. We started sweat testing people and trying to individualize hydration. And over the course of a number of years, that morphed into what is now the company Precision Hydration. And we're, working with athletes across all around the world in all sorts of different sports at every level, basically, to try to help them sort out their individual hydration needs, and it was mainly born out of my own struggles in that space.
Yeah, it sounds like something, it's a common thing, and it seems like people are often on one side of the fence or not, in that they either just don't know cramps, they've never had them, or it's just like the bane of their existence. And do you think a lot of times it ends up being hydration, or is it like, I've always described it as like a lot of people, it's like it's happening at like the most extreme part of the race. They've sort of exceeded their training, maybe they're doing more hills in the race than they're used to. Is there sort of multi-cause still in your viewpoint?
100%. Yeah, I think cramping is really not well understood, and it's one of those topics in sports science that is incredibly polarizing, and you talk to different people and you'll get very, very different adamant opinions. And my problem with that is that this isn't a question of a straightforward question of is cramping caused by electrolyte sodium imbalance or not. It's like there's too much evidence to support the fact that cramping to a degree, or certain types of cramping, often the type that happens late on in endurance sport, is influenced and potentially affected by hydration status, be that sodium depletion, a fluid overload, fluid depletion, whatever. There's something in that, and we know, and there's a plausible, if not a direct model, there's plausible theories around that, because sodium and fluid balance and electrolytes are involved in muscle contraction, nerve impulses. So in all of the stuff that is basically malfunctioning when you get a muscle cramp, electrolytes play a role. Interestingly as well, if you look across disciplines, if you look at cystic fibrosis patients, so CF is a genetic disease, and it results in people losing abnormally high amounts of salt in their sweat. And one of the ways that physicians often start to diagnose people with CF later in life, if they're not diagnosed as children, is that they get a lot of muscle cramps because they lose so much salt. So there's definitely something in the fact that sodium balance and electrolyte replacement is influential in muscle cramping. For me, it was like night and day. If I took the right amount of salts, I would, if not get rid of my cramping, minimize it to a huge extent compared with not supplementing. On the other side, like you were saying, fatigue, asking muscles to do things they're not used to, cramps that happen at times when there's no significant fluid and electrolyte loss can't be explained by that same theory. So there needs to be another theory. And I think that, there are other theories that are emerging around electrical misfiring of the muscles, and you see these products that look at that try to stimulate nerves in the mouth to combat that. And basically it's one of those areas where we don't have all the answers. In terms of, though, the prevalence of it and the relevance of electrolyte imbalance and cramping in endurance sport, whenever we survey people to see what kind of effect taking stronger electrolyte supplements in the right way has on their performance, we see something between a 70 and 80% positive impact of getting that aspect of your preparation right. So for me, it's a significant part of it, if it's not the whole answer.
Right. And there's not really a downside. Like I've in all these arguments and, like you say, polarizing debates, which I'm never sure why it needs to be so polarized, but is there, like, if someone's having cramps and they're getting it at whatever point during the event, I don't see a huge downside. Like, it's not like, oh, I took too much salt and I had even, like, the cramps just, like, were paralyzing, right? Like, does this happen? Is there a side effects that you can...
I think in general terms, no. If you use electrolyte supplements intelligently, then taking relatively high doses of them is not particularly a problem, because largely you'll tend to weigh out anything extra than what you need. That said, I always feel like, and it's sensible to caveat that statement with the fact that when you're telling athletes that it's not possible to take too much of something, some athletes will go a very long way towards taking loads and loads of stuff. So we've written a really detailed blog on cramping. Actually, it's one of the things that people hit and read on our website most frequently, so we could maybe link to it in the show notes, but in essence, what we suggest is that a high dose, to get your head wrapped around what a high or low dose of electrolytes is. If we talk in milligrams per liter, most sports drinks have around 400 or 500 milligrams of sodium per liter. So if you're on a run course in an Ironman, you've got some cramping, and you pick up a Gatorade type drink or something, it will usually have 400 or 500 milligrams of sodium per litre, which in our eyes is a low sodium dose. We have a product called pH 1500, which as the name suggests has 1500 milligrams of sodium per litre, so it's 3 times the strength of a regular sports drink, and that's a kind of a high dose to which there are basically no downsides to taking it and trying it. And if that helps alleviate those cramps, then you could be onto something. What we wouldn't suggest is taking 10 times that amount or something ridiculous like that, or
drinking that like all day every day. Like
exactly.
This is like, yeah. I did the sweat test you have on the website, which we'll also link to, and so it recommended it. I'm an elite, I race at a high level, often in hot weather, so it recommended that for sort of like maybe a loading beforehand, and then actually the 1,000, because I don't have sweaty marks, so I think during the race, my races are generally shorter too. It recommended the 1,000.
Yeah.
And then after a 15. So I'm sort of in the middle there, maybe not quite as high as you, but as just sort of an example for people.
Yeah, and I think that's where what it comes down to is the whole thing around, I mean, we talk about cramping being a polarizing topic, but even more broadly, I think hydration, electrolyte supplementation, these are all really confused and polarized topics in the world of sports science. You literally can talk to 10 different people and get 10 different answers, and what you'll find is that in the hydration and electrolyte supplementation space, there are camps like the camps from Gatorade and the Sports Science Institute where sort of electrolytes and hydration and drinking lots and everything is, if you read it superficially, the message is that is the answer to all your problems as an athlete. That is what you need to do. On the other side, you've got people like Tim Noakes from South Africa and an increasing amount of other researchers who are looking at that research and going, that's not all right. Actually, you don't need to worry too much about hydration and electrolyte supplementation, and it's not worth doing. It's all just hype from the sports drink industry. And then what you find is that actually neither of those groups are probably entirely right. The truth resides somewhere in the grey area in the middle, and what's really important is the truth resides around what works for you as an individual. Because definitely, if you're a 5k runner who's running predominantly in cool conditions and doesn't have a particularly high sweat rate, then the sports drink industry has relatively little to offer you, frankly. If you are an Ironman athlete competing in Kona who's pushing his body or her body to do 8, 9, 10 hours and be the best you can be, then I think that ignoring what the sports drink industry has to offer in terms of supplementation with carbohydrates, electrolytes, fluids, etc., is silly. There's a lot of benefit to gain from it, but there's not. The problem with that kind of answer is there's not like a clean and simple, are sports drinks necessary?
Right.
It's really, and that argument's become quite intense. It's become quite, like we keep saying, polarized, and it's framed all wrong. It shouldn't be. The argument shouldn't be, do we need hydration advice and supplements and the kind of stuff that the hydration industry, if you like, does, or do we just need to not worry about it and just drink water when we're thirsty? It's kind of, there's a place for both. And depending on what you do and what your individual needs are, if I followed the advice only to drink water when I'm thirsty, doing long distance endurance events, I would collapse pretty quickly. But what do I drink mostly on a day-to-day basis when I'm only doing 4 or 5 hours a week? Basically water. I'll use the supplements when I'm doing the long and hard sessions or trying to recover or before a race, that kind of thing. It's trying to use them intelligently.
Yeah, and that there's several layers of intricacy there, right? Because there's, you'll have these studies where they present like this average response rate. We don't give them electrolytes, and on average they did okay in this like maybe short distance run. Well, the actual goal in this thing was a short distance thing, but then also 2 of the people maybe got faster using sodium. And then you're like, well, what happened with those people? Like, those people probably should be doing sodium then.
It's a fantastic point, because when you look at these studies, like you say, reporting the averages it's like, I think there's a famous one in statistics where they talk about the guy who's got his head in the freezer and his feet in the oven, but on average he's fine, and it's like, okay, well, we're really interested in those outliers. I'm really, really interested in those outliers because I am one, and I know that if it involves long, hot, sweaty exercise, of a decent duration at decent intensity, I'm a guy who benefits from aggressive sodium and fluid supplementation because I lose it at a high rate. But what I don't want to be, and what we've tried not to be as a company, is someone who's trying to promote that as the message which is relevant to everybody. What's relevant to everyone is figuring out what your individual needs are. So things like the tool on our website, the online sweat test, the actual sweat test we do where we can take a sweat sample from you and measure it and look at the composition, and the products that come in multi-strengths are all part of a wider toolkit to enable you to play around with your individual needs and figure it out, and leave it to the scientists to argue about their dogmatic positions at one end of the extreme or the other. And actually, in reality, that's what a lot of athletes are doing, because although athletes read a lot of this sort of hyperbole in the press about knocking sports drinks or promoting them. Most people seem to take a more individualized and intelligent approach to it. I just think that messaging is unhelpful because it gives people uncertainty and pulls them in different directions.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've always sort of, if I'm drinking a lot of water, big long event, then I've sort of just like done it, just some electrolytes in there.
Yeah.
And again, I've never had a huge problem with cramping, but done that. But there was a guy, I was just at a stage race and he was having just a horrible time with it. And I think he was a little on the underprepared, but they were long days. It was sort of hot. And he sort of asked me about it because I had done sort of a Q&A coaching thing the night before at this race. And I was like, I mean, have you tried putting, some sodium or tried some electrolytes in there? And he was like, no. I didn't even know. And I was like, dude, just try that today, dude. So he had a great day. I don't know if it was like mental or the day was different or what, but sometimes it's just, people are so out of their normal, right? And this is getting into like the extremes of exercise here, right? And you're going to have to look at some of this supplementation, which may be counter to, maybe someone's on like a, very whole foods type diet and they don't want to take supplements, but sometimes these endurance events like Ironman, I always say like, Ironman is not paleo, right? Like the caveman was not doing these excessive endurance sports, right? And so sometimes we have to step outside of that everyday nutrition strategy to do this extreme stuff.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point because I agree with you entirely on that. I think that the sort of our physiology is based on evolution, and we would or evolutionary pressures and we would have done a fair amount of sort of, in inverted commas, endurance type exercise if we were hunter gathering and that kind of thing. But what it wouldn't have been was pushing your heart rate up to 160, 170 beats a minute for 8 hours in the pursuit of maximal performance for that length of time. We definitely go above and beyond what we're sort of designed to do when we do these really, really long, hard and hot endurance events. The fact that we can cope with them is remarkable, based on how other animals would or wouldn't be able to push themselves that hard in the heat. But the sort of the demands that places on you mean that actually just doing what our ancestors did and just living on a paleo diet and drinking some water is not going to be compatible with eking out top performance. Right. That's for sure.
I'm wondering, we have a lot of parents that listen to this. You mentioned, football/soccer. Do you have any advice for parents with kids? You have kids, they're probably maybe doing soccer or team sports or something. Are they, what are your feelings on the Gatorade, the electrolyte, the sports drinks for kids who are, doing 40 minutes of soccer in on the pitch, as you guys say?
Yeah, I think for youngsters, it's hard to say what I guess pre-adolescence is probably the best way to describe them. I would say largely my take on that, and this is what I do as a parent, is I just make sure that the kids have got water or juice or something that they are comfortable to drink available when they're at playing sport or outside running around especially in hot weather and whatnot, and let them, they do a great job on drinking when they're thirsty basically and topping themselves up. As long as kids have got availability of fluids, they're unlikely to run themselves into serious problems because they don't sweat a huge amount pre-adolescence, not compared with adults, and their drive to drink and their thirst instinct will make them top up. And I watch my kids like that, and some days it's funny, you see them and they basically have a kind of a drinking day when they drink quite a bit, and other days They might not, but within 48 hours or whatever, they basically self-correct and keep themselves topped up. So I think just making stuff available and not making it overly technical is important for kids. Just let them be guided by what they want to do. As they start to get older and get into adolescence and start to sweat more and start to engage in more adult length and intensity of practices, and that's when potentially looking at sports drinks to replace some of what they're losing in sweat or provide them with more energy can be useful. But I don't think they should be viewed as essential or a magic bullet for anything. You've got to use them in a targeted way. Where I'm starting to gain more experience, obviously in the UK, we have some hot days in the summer, but those hot days aren't particularly hot by standards around the world. Where I get an eye-opener is going to the southern states of the US in the summer and watching college football, kids practicing for NCAA, Division I college football, who are really working hard for hours at a time in lots of gear in incredible hot conditions and losing litres and litres or gallons of sweat. And that's where they often need a far more educationally proactive approach to getting their hydration right, because they are turning over a huge amount of fluid each day. And if they don't stay on top of that, that can lead them into problems. And that's the kind of area where getting more technical and using more products might be more appropriate, I think.
That's a great answer. Yeah, Andy, we've covered so much ground today. You have so much experience all around. So I've greatly enjoyed this conversation. It's gone by really quickly, but I've almost taken up an hour of your time. I know you're busy, so I'm going to let you go. Is there anything, cool, as far as social media, can people follow you?
Yeah, they can. We're precisionhydration.com is the URL for the business, and we're Instagram and Facebook, etc. on at Precision Hydration. It's a bit different on Twitter. We're at the Sweat Experts, so they can follow us on or find out on those. The best way, though, if people want to get in touch with us, if they've heard something and think, I want to ask these guys a question, we're very geared up to that, and you just email us at hello@precisionhydration.com, and there's myself and James and a couple of other guys in the office who are sort of ready and waiting to try and help athletes if they've got hydration questions. You can do the online sweat test, and I also believe we've set up a code. If anyone wants to try any of our products, you can use the code Consummate Athlete, which is all capitals, and get I believe it's 15% off an order of products on the website, so feel free to give that a try as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's to the end of September 2019, which is very gracious. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time.
No, thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed chatting, Peter. It's been great.
Awesome. All right, Andy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.